Hello, my name is Jane Kim, and I'm the industry programming producer here at TIFF. I'd like to welcome you to Money Talks, Bullshit Walks, How Change at the Finance Level Can Transform Film, at the 2020 Toronto International Film Festival's Industry Conference. Thanks for joining us live at our new Bell Digital Talk Cinema, where we're launching all our conversations. This session will also be available tomorrow on TIFF Digital Cinema Pro. I'd like to thank our lead sponsor, Bell, major sponsors RBC, L'Oreal Paris, and Visa, major industry supporters Telefilm Canada and Ontario Creates. This session is a Share Her Journey initiative and is presented by Breaking Through the Lens. The title says it all. Now enjoy Money Talks, Bullshit Walks, How Change at the Finance Level Can Transform Film.
Thank you, Tiff, for the warm welcome, and sorry about the audio thing. It's probably my problem because my dogs just started barking. So as soon as you start these Zoom meetings and these video conferencing, everything shuts down. So I'm going to try to stay with you for the next hour. I'm Mark Malkin, Senior Culture and Events Editor at Variety, and this is Money Talks, Bullshit Walks, where we'll be looking at how change at the finance level can create a more inclusive industry. This panel is presented by Breaking Through the Lens, an amazing initiative which connects female and non-binary directors to finance at top-tier film markets. At the end of the hour, we'll be showing the pitch presentations of this year's Breaking Through the Lens finalists, so please stick around. It's pretty amazing. I'd also like to thank Kathryn Moseley of 1220 Entertainment for her support of this initiative. Now, let's get to our panelists. Joining us today, Amy Baer, film producer and board president of Women in Film. Dana Lynn North, film and television writer, producer, and cultural curator. Most recently, Dana served as a writer, executive producer, and showrunner on the first three seasons of HBO's Emmy-nominated and incredible series Insecure. Henry Alberto, a Latinx filmmaker currently working on the screen adaptation of Amy Polanski's Gracefully Grayson. Henry was previously a writer on Apple TV's critically acclaimed Little America. And I didn't even tell Henry before this, Little America, my husband, who is an immigrant, who is undocumented, we sat on the couch and cried every episode.
Yeah.
So he is now documented, but that's another story. Jaron Crochet, film sales and packaging agent at Endeavor Content. And Tanya Wexler, film director known for Hysteria, starring Maggie Gyllenhaal and Jonathan Pryce. And most recently, Buffaloed, which premiered at Tribeca and was picked up by distribution by Magnolia Pictures. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Viewers today can submit questions at any time during our conversation using the chat function, and I'm going to try to get to as many of those questions during the Q&A format at the end of the session. So let's get to it. I think at this point, we can't talk about filmmaking without talking about the lens of the pandemic. You know, this is unprecedented times. Anyone who says they know what's going to happen, we know they don't know, because we don't know. But when it comes to filmmaking, do you think, I want to open this up to everyone, do you think the pandemic is going to make people, or is making people who are financing films more conservative, more worried, or is this the opportunity to do really a radical transformation of filmmaking and how filmmaking gets supported and the financing of film? Just raise your hand and talk.
I've been pitching a film during the pandemic and a show, and I've been really lucky and blessed where I just sold a pilot to Warner Brothers and I just got a feature film finance. But there has been a hesitation I've noticed from financiers that I've spoken to. So, I mean, I'm not on that side of things, and I get how things could be scary. But, I mean, yeah, I've noticed it, but I'm very lucky, and I'm grateful for that.
Darren, how is sales going during this? Are people, saying, you know what, let's wait, let's see what happens, wait till a vaccine, wait till theaters open? What are people saying?
So it's weird. And it's not business as usual, but I'm happy to report that, like, from the financing side and the sales side, things are still moving along. If everybody just got a deadline thing that popped up, Halle Berry's directorial debut just went. That just got announced. So, like, we're selling movies. Financiers who, here's kind of a crass way of, because the title of the panel is Bullshit Walks, the bullshit has walked. So like financiers who float around in indie circles, who are sort of finders, sort of not legit, we don't really deal with them as much right now. Deep-pocketed, blue chip financiers, or well-funded production companies, or sort of anybody along the spectrum, all the way to buyers, no matter kind of, the platform. The market's open. It's weird and everything's taking forever, but the market's open. So I would, another part of your question though, I think there's subjectively, because of just what's happening in our world right now, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in a different aspect. I think people are ready to understand. I think people in our industry, the gatekeepers, are starting to really understand the commerciality and the ability to make money out of stories that come from different perspectives than we have traditionally seen. So that's definitely my tool in the fight of bringing those perspectives from all walks of life and traditionally marginalized points of view that haven't always been very sort of mainstream adopted, right? Like, let's change that. I think that financiers all the way through distribution companies are actually ready for fresh ideas, and it can be that simple. So
I'm curious. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think creatively there's going to be all sorts of amazing stuff, because anytime you have a epic culture shifting moment, that's terrifying. It does breed creativity. From a person who came up through indie film and starting to get to make bigger movies, there was so much consolidation in the kind of, high-end art house space already, that a lot of the films that maybe were films I would have made had been moving more to online platforms, the Netflixes, the Hulus, which are great in a way. There's proliferation of a place for those movies to get made. I'll be curious in a year if we're so hungry to get the heck out of our houses that there's any renaissance in diversity in movie theaters, or if this is the beginning of, the further erosion of kind of theatrical smaller movies. I don't know the answer. I think, that consolidation was already happening, but boy, I'm really longing for a time when I can go to a movie theater without fear, and to go a lot. So,
Tanya, that actually, it's sort of touches on the next question I had for you. When you're looking at your future projects, how much are you looking at it through the lens of this pandemic, of saying, you know what, maybe someone's not going to want to finance this right now because we just don't know what the future is? How much is that? Or are you just saying, you know what, this is the project I want to do, pandemic or not, and I'm going to go for it?
I mean, the pandemic for me is more of a concern of, how am I going to shoot this? How are we all going to be safe? It's a much more present, real world, practical concern. Because of the time horizon, if I started a movie, I'm in post on something, I have something else that's in kind of just early pre-prep, where like a director's draft away from green light on this other thing at Netflix. And so for me, those are practical concerns. Personally, more on the kind of lens of just not your average straight white dude filmmaker, conversation. It's been a transition in the market. I think when Hysteria was at TIFF about a decade ago, it seemed like it's all going to change. And then, 5 years, I was about 5 years too early. And it took a long time to feel like the promise of we want more diversity behind the lens was going to start to come true. And I feel like it only started to come true in the last couple of years. And so for me, my dream, I'm not a writer director like a lot of people you probably talk to. I'm just a director for hire director. I do develop with writers, but my dream was just to go movie to movie, you know, to happen upon a project that the script was almost there. Maybe there's a piece of cast attached, like Zoe and Buffaloed, and we could go make it. That I fell in love with, and that is shifting. Like, for the first time, I have felt like, you know, I kind of, Buffaloed for me grew out of having gotten down to the last two on several bigger movies only for like the straight white cis male to like get the movie every time. And I called my agents and I was just like, you know, send me something with women shooting people because I'm so frustrated. I literally said that. I was like, I want a woman and a gun because that's all I can handle. And Buffaloed showed up with Zoe attached. And, you know, there was a lot of, can you do this for 2.5? Can you do this for 2.5? And I just kept going, yeah, sure. I have 4 teenagers. I can do anything. And so I just kept saying yes. And we made it. And then kind of, double date.
I'm gonna work it out. I'm working. I'm here for the entertainment. I'm just here for the yucks. Please carry on.
Please don't change a thing. It's so excellent. Oh, only one now. But I don't know if anyone else saw, but I got okay. You know. But yeah. So for me, you know, as I said, Buffalo kind of happened at a really good time for me personally because of being so frustrated that I was told we want women directors, and then it wasn't happening for 5 years. It was like, you know, I got a lot of silver medals, which don't go very far in for hire movies. So then, upon getting the film with a woman shooting a gun, screaming "fuck you" at the top of it, then my agents were going, well, what's your brand? And I realized kind of my brand was inconvenient women, inconvenient characters doing movies you normally see straight white cis males doing. And so, you know, that those projects are starting to appear and to have a place in the market that didn't happen, you know, in the early 20 teens even. I mean, it's that new. I think, and I'll kind of close my answer out here, is I think in terms of independent financing, casts are at the game, but also like you're always dealing with still the international market concerns. And so even if even if Europe is more open to something, or, you know, this culture, that culture, you have a whole world you have to sell your movie to. So if people are not interested in anyone but the most famous straight white cis males as leads, you're going to struggle to get that film financed in an independent way, because that pie is shrinking, right? So that $5 or $7 million film, or, you know, 8 and change that Hysteria was, it's not like it's going up with the cost of everything going up. It's not now a $12 million movie. Hysteria will now cost $12 million to make, but you probably can't finance it with that cast for more than 6. So that's where the Netflixes and Amazons and Hulus are going to get to make stuff that, you know, I mean, the film I'm going to make is being produced by Anachka Khan. She would never have gotten to make Always Be Your Maybe now if Netflix hadn't supported her. So I think, I don't know, like I said, I don't know if the pandemic is kind of wringing that out even more, or there's going to be some uptick in theatrical demand as we are desperate to like have community again. I don't know.
Amy, on that note, kind of speaking about when you said, you know, you were 5 years too early to the trend. You're doing research now, looking at what's happening. You know, when is it? I don't know how to phrase it exactly. I should. I'm asking questions. Like we're always constantly in this business saying it's a trend, it's a trend, it's a trend that's going to stay, which obviously goes against the word trend. Mm-hmm. When do these things stay, and what is your research looking at, and can you tell us if anything or some early results, what you're seeing at Pepperdine University?
Sure, I can definitely speak to what we're looking at. We're almost at the point where we're going to start to see some initial results. You know, we're doing a study called Entrepreneurial Pathways that Women in Film is doing in conjunction with Pepperdine University, the business school at Pepperdine. And it actually came out of sort of being inspired by my own and several board members' experience at Women in Film, which is that many of us had been either studio executives or production company executives. And when those jobs ended, the safety net wasn't there in the same way it was for men. You know, and I'm not sure that that's still going to be the case moving forward, but corporately, people who had spent a lot of time in different either production companies or networks or studios often would get a soft landing. And many of us were talking and realizing that we were on our own. And we were either self-financing or we were going out and finding a way to raise a little bit of cash to launch a production company or a content company, or however you want to call it. And so what we were looking at, because we'd already done a ton of research for an initiative called Reframe, which a lot has been already written and talked about, and we'll spend a lot of time on that. But that was really about, it was a joint effort with the Sundance Institute and Women in Film, talking about how to achieve parity, not just in front of, but also behind the camera and systemically throughout all the existing companies. So what we started thinking about was that without true parity of access to resources, there cannot be true parity. So we had a meeting about 18 months ago with the Femme Fatale organization, Film Fatales, which are an organization, a nonprofit of female directors, and they're really talented. All of them have made movies. And for example, they were talking about the fact that there was a significant drop off in access to capital the minute they had a budget that was north of $2 million. Mm-hmm. And you know, men don't have the same issues. So we went to Pepperdine and we designed a study. It's sort of a two-pronged approach. One is a multiple choice that we sort of sent out to hundreds of people. And then the other piece of it is going to be very focused interviews with what we're trying to designate as gatekeepers and decision makers, financiers, bankers, lawyers, people who are putting people together and getting them access to resources. Because the hope and the goal is, if Reframe is focusing on the systemic change, entrepreneurial pathways will be a way to connect women, non-binary, persons of color to resources across the screen industries as a whole. Not just, I have a movie that I want to get made or a script I want to develop, but I want to have a post-production house. I want to have a visual effects house. I want to have my own animation house. These are entrepreneurial endeavors that drive economies, that create jobs, that create more content, but they are disproportionately funded by and for white men in particular. And we have to look at the why everybody else isn't getting access to those resources.
Dana, let's talk to Amy's point about gatekeepers.
Yes.
Talk about some of those gatekeepers when you've gotten to their gates.
I would love to. You hit so many things that spoke to me. So, and I missed a moment when you first were talking about the pandemic, but I wanted to actually do a callback to what I've been calling a pandemic revolution, right? And it goes right back to what you were talking about, Amy, but because I think, for me, I feel like we've been, just recently, we have been forced into a moment of sort of expansion, and I guess I'm speaking to sort of culturally, social, politically, right? I feel like we're in both a moment of expansion and contraction at the same time, right? And so, for me, what's been fascinating, even as a producer and showrunner and writer who's also seeking funding for my production company and things like that, you know, earlier in the year, there was the conversation of, oh no, we're only giving money to pandemic related, even for things that are like we're only investing. I work with a social impact, company called Inspire Justice, and as we were reaching out to certain investors who take a specific interest, right, in BIPOC and women, but then suddenly it was, nope, we're only giving to pandemic related, investing in pandemic related things. Then as the pandemic coincided with the revolution, as I call it, so it became a pandemic revolution. And then we were like, we thought we would give you a call back and just touch base and see, what's happening and how you investors are doing, and where are you focusing these days. So it's been that's been a fascinating thing to observe, because coming back to the gatekeepers, right? I feel like with so many of these conversations, and the reason that I was excited to be on this panel in particular versus, more panels that are just about diversity and inclusion and, money, the idea of people, first of all, needing to assign the same value to art that's coming from a perspective that may not be your perspective. So, going back to Amy's point, it's like we've had, the gatekeepers have been the same for so long. The gates have been opening. From my perspective, there has been some change. I think we have been back in lately, in the trends, to your point about the trends that are trends. There has been a recent trend that I feel, and my fellow artists feel, where there's a little bit, it feels like there's a little bit more space and a little bit more recognition for art, for artists of color, for women to, to start to make more but for me, it's about more tables, not more seats at the same table that has been the same table forever, but creating more tables, which is why I'm excited about the idea of funds that are focused on actually elevating and giving more money to producers of color, people I know who have whole databases for crews of color, like actually putting that emphasis on, because I don't think we're not going to get to parity, in which we need parity, equity in a financial way, and I don't think we're going to get there from encouraging the same people who've been at the same table to just just open your eyes a little more. I don't think I don't have that kind of time to wait. And so I think actually creating more tables with more people who can just move this conversation along and are willing to, I think there's more of a willingness on everyone's part to be uncomfortable, because we've been forced to be uncomfortable, in some ways that we weren't expecting. And I do feel like I can feel those ripple effects. So coming back to the gatekeepers, I know I've touched on a lot of things, but I feel like it's all connected. So I do feel like I'm excited about seeing a shift and a broadening and an understanding that that the gatekeeper thing needs to shift in order for there to be any lasting change, I believe. And I'm excited about the ideas of getting some real equity in place, at a real, just across the board.
Henry, you mentioned you sold, if I'm correct, 2 projects during the pandemic. Tell us about that process, and tell us, were there people saying, you know what, not the time to go out there right now? Why don't you wait? Or
we were already going. I've been working on the one feature that we just got financed for the last 4 years. It's a book that I adapted. I wrote it on spec. It was very much me driving that train, and then all these other pieces started falling into place. And for a long time, it's a Latinx queer story focused on 2 Mexican-American boys. And it was always too queer or too brown. And I think now we've made room for that kind of story. My goal as a creative and as a writer is to move our stories from identity and to just exist in the world. And I think that's part of creating more tables, is that we're not regurgitating trauma porn or story that we've already seen, which I think that the male white lens loves to do, and the same gatekeepers love to do. So making room for creatives like me and to allow us to bring our perspective, I think is the move. And I think that that's why now everything's sort of aligned, where my projects are able to be financed. But it took a minute. And it also I needed all these other pieces to kind of be in place to validate that. But the work was always the same. My talent was always the same. But now I guess I've been given permission to walk into the room.
I just want to but dovetail on that, because I think what you said is so important. The idea that it's not going to be, we're not trying to sort of make trauma porn for marginalized groups, that it needs to be a mainstream universal storytelling conversation. I had an experience with Endeavor Content, helped us sell the film with a movie I produced that was released last year called Brian Banks. And we had a very intrepid financier in Shivani Rawat who financed the film fully. Young woman of color, was completely committed from day one. And we made a beautiful film that has been, universally loved. But we had a really troubled time finding distribution for it. And, it was seen as a marginalized person of color social justice story that doesn't really resonate to a larger audience, which just was so inaccurate. When we tested the film, it was the highest testing film I've ever worked on. It was the highest testing film the director had ever worked on. I mean, there were people who had made a lot of movies in the mix of this. And I do feel that is finally changing. I've often thought about what would have happened if that movie came out this year as opposed to last year. And it was one of, Bleecker Street, who did a lovely job releasing the film. They were terrific partners. They ended up releasing it for free in the month of June, as Warner Brothers did with Just Mercy, and it allowed more people to see it. But I really hope moving forward that what is shifting right now is that those movies have value, those stories have value in and of themselves. They're not one-offs, and that there's plenty of people that relate to them, and that I may not as a white cis female relate to what Brian Banks went through personally as a Black male growing up in Long Beach, but I can certainly be inspired by what he did to get through that trauma. That is something that is deeply inspiring to me as a human being that I could apply to my own experience. And as we've marginalized all these stories, we're missing an opportunity to broaden horizons. So I'm thrilled for Henry that he's you're able to get these movies made right now, because you're absolutely right. You haven't changed. You're still the storyteller that you've always been, but the doors are slowly starting to open that way.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting when when there's a project that's, predominantly POC that surpasses industry expectations. Yeah. It's whose fucking expectations did it surpass? You just never made them, and now we're proving that there's value in them.
That's right.
I think the problem of allowing, somehow the need to kind of market in a certain way drives audience expectation. And so, we're missing this. We kind of think that biography or demographics is the only way to view what audiences will be interested in what. And I think truly, I don't know how to solve it, because it ain't totally my job, but I wish there would be a way to kind of reevaluate that. I mean, my oldest, my son is, identifies as pan and poly. He calls me a heteronormative, terrible lesbian. I was like, you got a lesbian filmmaker mom in the village. That's got to count for some cool points, something. Nothing. And so, but I mean, his willingness to do what Roger Ebert used to call movies and film content machines for generating empathy. You go into a dark room and you sit in someone else's shoes for a while. That's right. And you live a different life. And so the fact that, my son, that in a different time might have just been considered a straight white dude, and is self-identified pansexual, poly, guy who, whose current girlfriend doesn't really, she goes she, her, but she doesn't really identify with gender. His willingness to sit in different perspectives and be just as interested to see a Mrs. Maisels as he is, some kind of, anime. I think that's being underestimated on how to get the content to the audiences. The audiences are getting scripted right into certain buckets, and we're kind of missing the fact that there is openness, and that we don't all have to translate our gaze through a white male cis gaze to enjoy some content. And I think that is the actual transition that needs to happen. Henry, I love when you said my talent was always there, and just the kind of place to showcase it essentially has shifted, the ability to showcase it. But I will also, like Lisa Crone, who won the Tony for Fun Home, years ago, right before Hamilton. It's like before Hamilton, after Hamilton. But and I remember when she won, she said, you can't, I can't remember, I'm paraphrasing terribly, sorry, Lisa Crone. But she basically said, you can't get good at theater without doing theater. Yeah. And I feel like you can't get good as a director or as a filmmaker or even as a writer, because even as a writer, you got to test the metal of it in production, without doing it. So I think the talent is there, but the at-bats, that's what I was like, I just want to get on a set. Yeah. I want to shoot. I need to be able to make mistakes and not feel like if I make a mistake, that's it, I'm done. Where if my male counterpart makes a mistake, he's already booked the next 3 movies, he's good. Mm-hmm. And that is still part of the deal.
Yeah, I think that for me, I didn't wait for the permission, because I didn't go to film school and I didn't have all these fancy things. I'm from Miami, and I had to rough it and do it and learn on my own. I would do projects myself. I'd grab my friends, pick up a camera, and shoot whatever it was to make those mistakes and learn on my own. But yeah, not everybody has that luxury, but I also think that that's the only way you could learn and do it,
That's right.
And I think this also goes back to the gatekeeper conversation, because you have a gatekeeper who says this doesn't work, right? And they have the power of the self-fulfilling prophecy. Mm-hmm. So, how I relate.
But also women, when people hire women based, what is the saying? Based on their accomplishments, and they hire men based on their potential.
Yes, that old chestnut.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jaren, could you talk about how it's changed for you? You were talking about how you want more voices, marginalized, however we want to phrase it. But how that's changed for you in your career, and when did you feel empowered right away to say, hey, this is what I want? Or has it slowly happened with the changing of the times?
That's a good question. So I've always had the sometimes good fortune, sometimes big problem of not really waiting for permission. I think a lot of my fellow panelists have that problem too. But I've also never been the voice, and I've never been the artist with the capital A, right? But I can hear the voice, and I can hear the artist, and I can sometimes get people marching in step, and then convince the money people to fund the artist, and then convince the other people to fund that, and whatever, right? So how has it changed? I think that without going too far down a rabbit hole, I think specificity is actually a good thing. I think that the streaming wars have illuminated that you can find an audience anywhere. So even the most non-woke, whatever you want to call them, maybe somebody who's not trying to just a benign executive who isn't just trying to not get fired or whatever, right? Kind of the stereotypical gatekeeper. Even they can understand that what may have been too queer and too brown 5 years ago, you can find a queer brown audience, right? At the center of that bullseye of who you are targeting that movie for, exactly who that audience is, we can identify that audience. It's beyond altruism. It's beyond, hey, let's do the, let's just make audiences aware that these people exist now. We're past that, right? We're past that. So because we're past that, I think now it's about, now it is about kind of a more universal, we're all sitting around the campfire telling a story. And it's not about being colorblind, right? In that way of like, well, we should just hear anybody tell any story and they're all the same. And no, they're not the same, right? We've got to highlight culture, and we've got to highlight, you know, different voices and storytelling and everything like that. But good storytelling is still good storytelling. And I do think that even your lowest common denominator executive understands that. And when you pair the ability to target an audience with at least the understanding of good universal storytelling, and absolutely that you know, Roger Ebert sentiment of being an empathy engine and just mainlining empathy for 2 hours of somebody's story, right? The reason why that can be effective is because good storytelling pulls you in, no matter who you are. That's why, you know, I was on a panel at another festival a few years ago, and Get Out was the #1 movie in Korea, right? Because of course it was. You know, same thing with Moonlight a couple years later, right? So that's just universally good storytelling. And so, but to answer yours, let's talk about the money of what that means, though, because ultimately, how you get from a lark, a one-off, a story about, you know, a particular community maybe that doesn't get that much limelight, and you transition that over into, it's just a story and it's really interesting and wasn't that a good movie, is the gatekeepers and the whole value chain of financiers through buyers understand that they have the tools and they have the capability to monetize it and to make money off of it, right? So a good example of that is, you know, every 4 or 5 times a year, right, there will be an all-black, like, sexy thriller that opens #1 or #2 at the box office, right? And it'll be an in-between, you know, in between Fast and Furious whatever and in between Marvel whatever. There'll be a weekend in March, right, where a movie goes and does $14.5 million at the box office, right, and wins the weekend, right? Probably made that movie for $7 million, right? It's probably going to go on to do $33 million, and it's going to go on to do a bunch of ancillaries after that. That's a good business to be in. I can tell you this with authority. There really isn't anybody doing that model and have it on a treadmill of like, let's just make those. Even nothing else, let's just make those because those make money, right? People are still not doing that. So I look at that as opportunity, right? And I look at that as, you know, having been on one side of the velvet rope for a long time and now being on the other side of a velvet rope, lift the rope up and have other voices come in because they can do a better job of telling stories that are universal stories that we haven't heard yet, because we can make money off of that, right? And there will be a time, hopefully in the near future, but those are not called urban movies anymore. Right. Just called movies. I abhor that term. That's what they're called right now. Still. But I think it's still right. But I think, again, my tool in the fight, I had an op-ed a little while ago where I talked about this a little bit. I'm not trained to be a civil rights attorney. I'm not a community organizer. I am somebody who can take money and then multiply it, right? And take somebody's voice and then help other people hear that voice and then multiply it. So that ship is turning. It's turning very, very slowly, right, over time. Even if we're just talking about the urban movie thing, right? Or, you know, there's a lot of different parts of this conversation, but it's kind of all linked together. But I think it's actually all good commerce. I see no problem with. I see complete overlapping circles between commerce and new voices and storytellers.
Mm-hmm. Can I put a question to everyone? And Mark, actually, a question for you, because I was talking with a filmmaker just recently about how, you know, in the late 90s, early 2000s, if you had something like A Best Man or The Waiting to Exhales, or, you know, pick something from back in the day, and you might hear, this is such a great movie for Black audiences, right? And, you know, in a variety, right, as the review is written. And I'm curious about, for me, the intersection between, again, that perception translating to, you know, because Jaren, you're saying on the one hand, yes, we're past that idea that like, wow, Get Out can make a lot of money. You know, we're past some of that, but I do wonder how one influences the other in terms of, you know, that continual idea of like, because I still think sometimes you'll see the headlines that are like, OMG, Get Out opened and look at those numbers versus, you know, Scorsese's film lands and it has, you know what I'm saying? All of that. There's still that kind of like, oh, the surprise that, you know, and I'm wondering, do you all think that that influences, I feel like it does, influences the opportunity, influences the investments, influences the ease with which you can, you know what I'm saying? Influences all of those things in terms of the intersection between those.
The success, are you saying the success of the film influences the opportunity for the next film?
No, I'm saying how the language that is used.
Yes.
And expectation and perceptions.
Yes, thank you. And promoting the film and reviewing the film, even when it does well, the language that is used in creating perception, yes, that then seems to feed into expectation, feed into how much we're going to finance this film for, all of that. I'm curious what people think about, is that also shifting, you know, and the influence?
It feels like everyone wants a sure thing when it comes to female-driven movies for communities of color, but they're willing to take risks on kind of more traditional cis white hetero narratives, right? Like they'll make the big risk on, you know, and then, you know, like IP, right? Mm-hmm. But it feels like the big risk, they're like, well, of course there's an audience. Basically, it's like there's a belief in the audience for, you know, certain genres of like straight, white, hetero, white and hetero, is there straight and hetero, is that the same thing? But like, right, it seems like there's like a belief and a willingness to take financial risk from, this is my, I mean, I'm just kind of pulling this out of my derriere. But anything for us, kind of like for women, for people of color, for queer, or whatever, the budgets are going to come way down because no one will take any risk, and they want to know they're going to get all that. Like everyone wants all their money back, but I feel like there's no risk on those stories. That's my sense of it.
Or they want story, like they want to do, oh, Girls Trip was really successful, let's do a Latinx Girls Trip, or let's do another version of Girls Trip, and it's like that. We're not moving the conversation forward by recycling the story. So.
Well, it's the same thing. No risk. We knew it worked here.
Right.
Is it going to work here and here and here? And look, people don't want risk in business if they can make money, but it feels like they're willing to take risks in one area.
Mm-hmm. But I do think that there's a paradigm shift happening right now, which is what the streamers have become are business to consumer pipelines. So, and I think what you're starting to see, and it is, as Jaren said, the ship is slowly turning. Mm-hmm. I do think that you're going to start to see the more legacy companies starting to make a diverse slate because they have to, whether they distribute those on their streaming platforms or they distribute them theatrically, I think still remains to be seen, because I do actually believe theatrical is going to rebound. And, you know, I spoke to somebody involved with Tenet, and they were thrilled with last weekend's numbers, despite what the press sometimes will say. They were ecstatic with the domestic numbers. But I think that is starting to change, because it has to, because the streamers are a business to consumer entity. They're looking at their algorithms and they're finding ways to find content for those people. And so if you can't get a romantic comedy anymore out of a big studio, and suddenly Netflix is making romantic comedies, and you like romantic comedies, you're going to go over there and watch it. So I do think that the ship is starting to turn, but I want to go back to what you were saying about language. It's massive. It is. It's massive. I mean, I've had experiences where, I produced a film 4 or 5 years ago, Mary Shelley, and we brought it to TIFF, and we had a great screening. And every filmmaker, every reviewer who was a woman, really got the film. Mm-hmm. And every reviewer that was a man critiqued Haifa al-Mansour and how she told that story. But it was a female story directed by a woman with her particular point of view on it. Whether you love the movie or not, that's completely subjective. But language does matter, and it affected how we were able to sell the film. And I had the same experience, as I said, on Brian Banks, where it was you know, whether you love the execution or not, it resonated with every audience we showed it to. And we had many potential distributors who would label it as a Black movie or a Black experience story. And half of the people involved in the movie were white. So it all spoke to us.
Right.
But
It
think that
yeah.
it does. And I would agree with Jaron so much that I am really feeling this sort of Titanic ship really finally starting to avoid the iceberg, as much out of necessity as anything else. Yeah. But I do think that we're in the moment right now of the revolution. And I think that it'll become a lot clearer, I think, over the next 6 to 18 months.
Is it, I mean, maybe I'm being idealistic or pessimistic, because we know who the gatekeepers are. They are the cisgender, straight, white male with a big belly, you know. Those are those guys who are sitting at the table deciding the money. For me, what I keep saying is it's going to be a generational shift. You know, Tanya's talking about her son. I talk to the young people in my office and I cry because I'm like, you don't understand, as a queer boy, if you were in my classroom, my life would be a lot different. Yeah. That said, with that generational shift, we know comes conflict and people fighting that, and they're empowered, as we're seeing. So do you think there will be this generational shift where, you know what, there's the iceberg, the Titanic just went right around it, and by iceberg, by people?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. And I'll tell you why.
Agree.
So that gatekeeper that you described is absolutely real, but they fucked around and let people like me into the room. So now we have infiltrated, right?
Yes.
But that's okay, because I am still, you know, business people, right, in the industry who are entrepreneurial and smart capitalists, right? Forget being on the right side of history, forget, you know, altruism again, but even just pure capitalism, right? Even that would suggest we need to hear more points of view. We need more fresh stories, right? We have the algorithms now, right? We understand how to target these people. And we also understand that, you know, every kid, I have a 5-year-old and a 2.5-year-old. Disney knows that they need to tell diverse stories, right? Because diverse stories turn into universal stories because they just are fresh, right? Do a story about a Pacific Islander and and put some great songs to it. And like, of course, Moana is like every kid's favorite, you know, soundtrack and everything, right? So that's a given. What we're also seeing though is a little bit of a chicken and egg, and we're working on that. So the chicken and egg in this case is when you have that self-fulfilling prophecy, Mark, as you were describing, of, well, okay, we're gonna take a risk, right? And this is the whole thing that a couple of the panelists were talking about, of like, well, how many chances do I get to make a mistake, right? How many films do I have lined up next? The chicken and egg is we need to have more well-capitalized, earlier in the value chain entities, similar to where I sit, but, you know, companies that I work with, development financiers that I work with, equity financiers that I work with, even buyers, to push the ball up the hill so that when we pass it off and when it is time to market, right? Like, what is the marketing budget for outdoor advertisements on those Black thrillers that I mentioned abroad, right? What do they actually spend to get the word out? There's a big Black population in France. Do they know about that sexy thriller? Why wouldn't that work, right? So that self-fulfilling prophecy, because it's bound to resources, because it's bound to actual cash and capital, right? That's part of the risk. That's the risk that certain entities aren't willing to take. That's right. I believe, and a lot of people like me believe, that risk is the risk that will end up paying off, right? So that metaphor back around, okay, did the Titanic, you know, go around the iceberg or not? Some of us are going to go around the iceberg, right? Some of us are going to get left behind, right? And if Hollywood is good at anything, it's, I want to do what they just did. I want to make money like that. I'm willing to take the risk for it. And I'll go even further with my risk profile for that.
I hope you are right, because I hear what you're saying about, capitalism, but being the kind of just pure capitalism being the driver. But I think bias trumped data for a long time. We had more than 50% of ticket buyers being women. We had more films with a female central character making more money on the dollar for years, right? Like they would, the study showed that when you'd have a central female character, I don't know if it was because budgets were lower, but they would do better in like the top, Hollywood film than their, male-driven counterparts. And yet still the risk was actually not, following the data. So there was some bias screen that was kind of going against even, right, that kind of basic economic play, or a kind of, a counterintuitive, it's counterintuitive, but following the data play. So I'm hopeful, really hopeful, that there's more folks like you who are going, it's there. You know what I mean? Literally.
Yeah, it's not trivial how we get there.
We've been dealing with bias basically completely, overwashing some basic statistics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of racist people, especially in the international market, right? We have a movie. I gotta be careful here. We have a movie that was a package that was introduced at a major marketplace when we still had at Berlin. That major international buyers want to wait and see, and what we know that means is the major A-list star who is a black man who's American, who's sort of at the center of this really fun big commercial movie. We got to go cast a co-lead. They're saying we want to wait and see. That means they want to make sure it's not two black people in the leads, right? From the German buyers, from the UK buyers, from the Spain buyers, from the Australia, but right. So we know that's what that means, and that's what I mean with the chicken and egg, right? Somebody has to put their thumb on the scale and say, no, we are actually betting on this, right? So this film will get the resources, right? We have the entities in the value chain to be able to do that and to be able to force a hand a few times, and when it works, that's when the spillover happens.
We only have a few more minutes left, so we want to get some questions from the audience. And I think this one is really key here. Ash Mayfair asks, in terms of the money portion of the industry, where do minority and filmmakers at the beginning of their careers go to get their projects financed? Why would attract any of these speakers to put their passion and dollars behind a project to make it happen? I'm not sure what that meant, but basically, where do the young filmmakers of color, LGBTQ, Latinx, where do they go to get their projects financed?
I mean, I'm at the beginning of my career, and I'm getting my first legit with an actual budget feature film financed, and the way I've come up is not only doing my own projects and self-financing and using all the resources that exist to raise money, but I've had a lot of success submitting to programs like the Sundance episodic program. Outfest was really helpful. There is these networking building resources that could help guide you. I've also been lucky to have an amazing team behind me that has helped elevate my career. It's been a struggle, but it's possible. And I think that's sort of what my mission is. I call myself a disruptor because I don't have any of the formal training. And it's I'm willing to fight the fight to make room for the next generation, to your point, Mark, of Latinx, trans, and queer folks that are coming behind me. So I'm willing to fail, and I'm also willing to fight really hard to prove myself. So the fear that's put on me is not on them.
Marcel Sinati, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. What are your opinions on independent content producers like YouTube and Twitch, and how do you think they will integrate with the mainstream production community?
That's a great question.
It is. I feel like Quibi, I'm just thinking about what Quibi is doing, and I think there's just that sense of influence. You can see how people are being influenced by all, you know, the TikToks, the Twitches, all of that stuff. And I think what still remains to be seen. Personally, I'm curious what you all think, but I'm excited to see how some of the larger studios that aren't necessarily as nimble, but are excited by and inspired by all of that. I think that some filmmakers can make some noise with a lot of that stuff that hasn't yet been made.
Well, what's interesting that I've seen on the publishing side and television broadcast side, there's a thing that happens a lot in TV. Oh, that person has 20,000 gazillion million followers on YouTube. Let's give them their own show.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
It never translates.
It doesn't convert.
It doesn't translate.
Occasionally, like it's rare.
Rare.
Every once in a while, you'll have a breakthrough.
But it seems like that, right? It seems like that person has 180 million followers. Why aren't they following them to that next platform, to film or television?
Yes. I will say too, it goes back to that point about being able to actually tell a good story, right? And I think
is it good?
That would be I guess the pro on the one hand is you have new forms, new technology, new social media that's always popping up. Telling a good story is never going to go. Telling a good story is timeless, right? And being able to do that is timeless. And I think that gets underestimated sometimes, right? I mean, that's right, Mark, to what you're speaking of. It's like all of the followers and all of that. You got to still be able to bring people in with a good story.
And the other thing I wanted to touch upon before we finish are, not just directors, the crew. I know I was very impressed the trans documentary Disclosure. And the director said, I want a trans crew. And if they couldn't find a trans person to fulfill a spot, the person who got that spot had to have a trans trainee to teach them. And I know the Academy, that's a whole other discussion about the best picture nominee, but the Academy is trying to implement some of that within their qualifications and their eligibility. How much are you seeing of that on sets and productions where it's looking at the crew and going, okay, we've got to diversify here. What do we do? And what do you see people doing? How do you solve that problem?
I'd love to jump in here because one of the things that we did on Brian Banks, we shot in Memphis because our director lived in Memphis, and he requested that we allow him, because he teaches at a lot of the local schools, that we allowed interns, persons of color, to intern in every department. And we did it, and it was extraordinary. And I know for myself, in my productions moving forward, I'm building in a line item on every budget to make sure that we have the resources to do just that. I know that Shivhan's Pictures is doing that and has done it on their movies subsequently, because that's the only way to build the pipeline, right? And it was a really extraordinary experience to see. There was one woman in particular who was African-American, grew up in Memphis, loved hair and makeup, but never thought ever about having a job in the screen industries as a hair and makeup artist. And the fact that she was able to intern in the hair and makeup trailer for the entire film and learn that if she kept doing this, she could join the local union and actually have a thriving career in her hometown. Yeah. She could travel to Nashville or Atlanta, whatever. That's how you open the doors. Is not everybody has to be an actor. Not everybody has to be an executive. There are so many opportunities. And I love that story, Mark, about if you couldn't find a trans crew member, you had to train a trans crew member. I think that has to be, if I were running a studio, I would implement that on every single production, because that's
starting to happen.
Yeah, it's the only way to build the pipeline. That's it. That you have to show the next generation, you have to show a diverse population that there is opportunity in this. There was a story that the Hollywood Reporter, Stephen Galloway, who used to run who's now moved on to Chapman College, but they raised this big fund. They did this thing with Big Brothers, with Big Sisters, and they were, bringing raising money for scholarships for these girls to go to film school. And anyway, they had a very difficult time filling the slots they had for kids in South Central to come and learn how to participate in the screen industries, because they just didn't think it was possible, because for them, you were either an actor or you were, maybe a mogul. But the idea that you could be a craftsperson, that you could be an electrician, that you could be on the camera crew, that you could be a musician, all those things have to be built and baked into the system at the ground level. You have to have systems that implement a requirement to train these people.
And on that note, I think it's it. It's been an hour. I feel like obviously we could keep going on and on and on and on, and I'd love to, but we only have an hour. So thank you so much for your questions and for tuning into our panel. And thank you once again for the TIFF team for hosting us. With their powerful Share Her Journey campaign, TIFF has been a vocal supporter of women in film, making it the perfect home for this conversation today. But as I said at the beginning of the show is not over at the end. Another topic. The presenter of this panel, Breaking Through the Lens, is another organization at the forefront of cultivating change in the industry. From over 250 submissions spanning 54 countries, talk about globalization, Breaking Through the Lens narrowed their selection to just 10 unique feature films by female or non-binary directors seeking finance to move into production. It is my pleasure now to introduce the pitch presentations of these final 10 projects. Should you wish to get in touch with any of the filmmaking teams, please visit breakingthroughTheLens.com. Stay safe, be well, and please keep wearing your masks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Beata Salama. I'm a Spanish filmmaker from Melilla. And I'm saying that because Melilla is a very peculiar place. It is situated in North Africa. It's actually in Morocco, but it does belong to Spain. It is 12 square kilometers big and completely surrounded by a fence. And actually, it is the border nowadays between Africa and Europe. And we have 3 communities living in there. We have a Jewish community, a Muslim community, and a Catholic community that has been living in this place for centuries. But we don't really want to talk about the complex and politics of this place. We want to talk about the people that live there. I grew up there being a woman, and I did belong to the Jewish community. And I always have this question with me, like, how much of the tradition and the values that I really learned in this community I have still with me now, being a modern Occidental woman trying to survive in the contradictions of all that. So I created this movie, Alegría, that is going to be my debut feature movie. And Alegría is also the main character. She's 50 years old. She's an atheist Jew that have been living in Mexico to be out of the family. But this day she came to Melilla to have some peace out of her life when her niece called her from Israel, and she said she's coming to Melilla, to the same house she's living at now, having a huge Jew wedding, bringing all the family, tradition, and religion with her. Alegría has always been avoiding that, but now there's going to be no way to avoid that. Also, we're going to have 3 other characters, women, trying to find their way in the movie too, from different cultures. We have this female universe working together to create a wedding. So it really is a wedding movie, because we're going to have the feeling of women working together, having culture and tradition mixed, collaboration and party. We are going to have a party, and also we're going to get to see how these communities has been developing their own culture and how they all live together in there. I really think we have a very clear audience between all the women that are going to be seeing a different kind of women, a different universe we haven't seen in movies that much. Also, the communities we are talking about, they've been moving all around the world. We have a huge Sephardic community around the world that I really think and hope they want to see what we are talking about here. And we have some movies that have been talking the same subjects in the same kind of the same tone. I'm gonna have here a comedy with a touch of drama, but happy movie at the end of it, like Caramel, Monsoon Weddings, all of them made by women, for women, and always having a female universe, and a way of just sharing how we see life. In this case, my point of view of my home city, that is very local, but at the same time, a universal story for everyone. I really hope we can get it. Well done, and for you to enjoy it. Thank you.
Hi, how are you? My name is Clara Nieto. I'm the executive producer of the film Alegría. With my first project, I got Oscar nominated. It was a short film and it was 4 years ago. After that, I've produced 3 films and 2 series, one for Netflix and the other one for HBO, the last one created by myself. Here in Alegría, what we have is a budget of $2.5 million, but we have already raised $2 million. Our distribution company is a very well-known and prestigious Spanish one called Caramel. Our international sales agent, it is called Latido Films. We have our cast is very international, but we have to focus in the main role, which is interpreted by Cecilia Suarez, which is a huge star in Mexico. The reason is because besides we are looking for Spanish audience, and besides we are looking for Jewish audience, we are looking for Latin American audience too. We are going to shoot on January in the next year, hopefully. And it's going to be mainly in Spain, but a little part is going to be in Morocco and a little part is going to be in Israel. What we are looking for here is a partnership, is one or several partnerships to take and complete our financial plan. The part that we have to complete is this 20%, which is $500,000, and we are looking for international co-production partners mainly from US, because of the US community and because of the Latin American community, for Israel and for Mexico. But we can split, it is not necessary that just one partnership take the whole percentage, okay? As a resume, I just want to say that we have already a Spanish movie here, and it's going to be a successful Spanish movie, but we want to break our borders and to make it bigger. If you want to help us. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Laura Moss. I'm a director and production designer from New York City, and I am so excited to be talking to you today about my feature project, Birth Rebirth, a psychological horror film about motherhood and creation, inspired by Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Birth Rebirth is the story of 2 women raising a Frankenstein's monster who also happens to be a 5-year-old girl. One of these women gave birth to her, the other brought her back from the dead. Rose, the Dr. Frankenstein of our story, is a pathologist who is obsessed with reanimation and uses stem cells harvested from her own body to create tissue regenerating serum for her experiments. Celie is a dedicated maternity nurse whose 5-year-old daughter, Lila, is the center of her universe. One night, Lila falls ill and dies, very suddenly, of meningitis, leaving her mother in shock. Lila's body lands on Rose's autopsy table and subsequently goes missing. Celie tracks down Lila's body, discovering her daughter in Rose's apartment, alive. Rose has brought her back to life, and Rose is the only person who knows how to keep her that way. The 2 women care for the little girl in secret, but as Lila grows, so does her need for regenerative serum. Her demand becomes greater than what Rose can supply, but another source of stem cells is readily available: Celie's pregnant patients on the maternity ward. Rose and Celie set out on a dark path in order to protect the things they hold most dear. For Celie, it is the life of her only daughter. For Rose, it is the possibility of conquering death itself.
Hi, my name is Molly Elfman, and I'm the producer of Birth Rebirth. I've done over 50 shorts and 7 features specifically with first-time directors because they can come out of the box with something new, something that we haven't seen before, and that's honestly what audiences want. Something that I've really dedicated my life to is finding new and innovative stories within the genre space that allow us to discuss important topics, but in a way that is provocative, is exciting. What I look for in a director is somebody who has a vision, and I can say that Laura Moss is one of the most specific directors that I have ever worked with. I think that with Laura Moss at the helm of this film, we are going to both achieve shock and awe, and also something meaningful in what's represented on screen.
I've been watching horror movies since I was too young to be watching horror movies. And the films that have really stuck with me, the ones that transcend the horror genre, films like The Shining, Rosemary's Baby, Silence of the Lambs, all have certain things in common. They are beautifully shot, meticulously designed films that are rooted in the psychology of their characters, but also deliver on primal scares. This is the kind of film we want to make. I grew up obsessed with horror, and I want to put something back into that culture that wasn't there for me when I was a kid. Something that's not serving a feminist agenda, but is meaningfully from a female perspective. I know that legions of underserved female horror fans feel the way that I do, and I'm so excited to make this film and share it with them.
With all that said, we plan to shoot this film at the top of next year, right in Q1 of 2021. And with that, we've definitely come up with a COVID plan of how to attack this production. I've been working with line producer Matt Medlin, who's made many, many films. I actually just completed my first COVID production. He will have completed another one by the time that we get to Birth Rebirth. I would love to talk you through that plan in detail, but we'll get to that a little bit later. As for where we're at, we're looking for full financing for the project right now. We already have support from Sundance, from Rooftop Films, from UTA and Mosaic. We've taken the project out and are already in conversations. If you have interest, we would love to talk to you further about that and get into the details of it.
Thank you so much for your time and your attention. I hope you have a wonderful rest of festival.
In order to salvage the relationship with her father, 11-year-old Phoenix Loffridge gangs up with a group of boys to take down the arsonist destroying their neighborhood. My name is Justin Merced. I'm a writer and director from San Francisco, and I have a feature film called Chicken Shit. I grew up on youth adventure films from the 80s and 90s. Classics like Stand By Me, The Goonies, The Sandlot. Those films made me believe I had a power at a very young age. I loved those movies, but I always thought they'd be even better if they weren't all about white boys from the suburbs. That's why I'm so excited to introduce to the genre my feature film, Chicken Shit. Chicken Shit is a reboot of the youth adventure film and is revamped for a new audience. The story follows Phoenix, a young black girl growing up in Detroit, Michigan. Phoenix lives with her father, a hardened arson investigator. Both he and Phoenix are grappling with the death of Phoenix's beloved grandfather, and their shaky relationship worsens. But then Phoenix meets this group of precocious and mischievous boys, and they become like her second family. Together they spend a happy summer adventuring through Detroit, photographing abandoned landmarks. All of this comes crashing down though when Phoenix's neighborhood goes up in flames. So Phoenix takes it upon herself to save her neighborhood and prove herself to her father with the help of the boys by taking down the arsonists. Like the films of my youth, Chicken Shit is full of action, adventure, comedy, and fun, with a beating heart that stresses the importance of friendship, courage, and self-worth. But Chicken Shit also readjusts for the world of today, featuring brown and black kids growing up in harsher realities. I believe it's important for the youth of underrepresented communities to see characters like them prevail and triumph in today's world. I first went to Detroit in 2013. People told me to be careful because in the media, Detroit was only depicted as dangerous, decrepit, and dirty. This couldn't be further from the truth. Detroit is a beautiful city loaded with history, art, music, culture, and more importantly, tight-knit communities that I came to know. This movie is inspired by them. I wanted to make a movie that honored the people that stayed in Detroit to make it a better place for them and their children. I needed youth adventure films growing up. Those films mattered so much to me when I was dealing with growing pains, my parents' divorce, and my own strict father. And that's how I know this film will matter to so many others. The universal themes in my film and the ones of my youth remain relevant and engaging to people of all ages and backgrounds. That's why the nostalgia surrounding this genre still exists, and it's why my producer Mickey and I are so excited to introduce this film to the world.
Hi, my name is Mickey Baez Schiff, and I'm the producer of Chicken Shit. Some context for you. When I first got the script, I was immediately enamored and sucked in by the story. It had the nostalgia of all of these movies I grew up loving and watching, yet it was told from a completely unique, new, fresh perspective of an underrepresented, black kids in an underrepresented place like Detroit, but a place that's rich culturally and aesthetically. And so I immediately saw the universal appeal of this type of story and the commercial ability of this type of story. And so it was no surprise to me that when I checked out, Jess's proof of concept short film, which premiered at South by Southwest, it showed her love of Detroit and this culture that is never shown in this light before. The script has also garnered some awards, which I was also not surprised to see that it took part in the Hampton Screenwriters Lab, as well as was a San Francisco Film Grant recipient. Jess has since gone on to do shorts with Paul Feig and further reinforced her prowess behind the lens. So where we're at now, we have champions of the script at high-level talent agencies like CAA. Julia Glauci is a huge proponent of the script and will continue to be helpful. We've got first money in, which is exciting, and we're targeting a summer 21 production. We've got an Emmy Award-winning cinematographer on board in Christian Springer, and we're excited to just be presenting to you and looking forward to having more conversations about chicken shit. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Elle Kemihira. I'm director and producer of Jennifer 42. My team and I are incredibly honored to be part of Breaking Through the Lens TIFF 2020, and it's a privilege to present our project to you today. In the US, 4 women every single day are murdered by a male partner or ex. But the numbers don't tell the story. Our film, Jennifer 42, is a fully animated documentary feature film about one family, Jennifer Magnano and her 3 children's ferocious fight to save themselves from their dad Scott's violence. Sadly, Jennifer did not survive that fight, but her children did, and Jennifer 42 was told through their eyes. They take us back into their hidden family history and how their father's dangerous behavior evolved over time and how they survived, but also about their harrowing and brave escape and how that escape was the beginning of a bizarre journey crisscrossing the country on the run from Scott and on the run from a new enemy. A system that colluded actively to entrap them again. We chose animation for our story because we feel that it makes this story much more accessible and universal. It also allows us to bring to life the children's memories and subjective experiences. We're working with award-winning animation director Yulia Ruditskaya on an animation approach that's cinematic and vibrant and deeply emotional. We are also partnering with Brooklyn-based woman-owned studio Mighty Oak, who specialize in beautiful handmade animation. We have come quite far to date, and we'd like to show you a small glimpse of our work, and then my producer Katie Hyde will tell you more. Thank you.
I remember there's one case in late 90s, early 2000, where a woman left her husband and took him to court, and they were leaving the courthouse, and the man shot her and the lawyer. And my father said, if you ever leave, that's exactly what I'll do. I'll shoot you and the piece of shit lawyer who's working for you. I don't know if he thought it was right, but he thought it was his right.
So here's where we are with production on Jennifer 42.
The documentary portion of the film is totally complete. We have conducted all of the interviews and acquired all the life rights. And so we have a 75-minute audio rough cut currently with about 3/4 of the film in a rough animatic stage. And so what remains is full animation production with Mighty Oak, as well as sound design and music scoring. And really nothing is stopping us from hitting the ground running, because this pandemic, frankly, doesn't stop a production like ours, since it's really animation and sound and music. And so what we're seeking is financing. Our budget is $1.6 million, and we've raised about 10% of that so far through grants and crowdsourcing. And we are also really intentionally placing our production in New York to take advantage of that 30% tax credit. And some really great news is that we have an executive producer on board, Jennifer 42, who has unprecedented access to our target audience. Laura Richards is a world-renowned criminal behavioral analyst, law changer, Hollywood producer, queen of the podcast world. And because of her, we know that we can distribute this film far and wide, and not only deliver to our audience the amazing film that is Jennifer 42, but also a companion podcast that will be spearheaded by Laura herself. So yeah, Jennifer 42 is really, it's an event film. It's Waltz with Bashir meets I Am Not Your Negro. And that is our target audience. People who choose to watch groundbreaking documentaries in order to enlighten to the world that we all live in. And to that end, we're not just seeking financing. We're also looking for partners in that journey. Our ultimate goal with this film is to pop the lid off of domestic violence. And so we're seeking partners not only for funding, but also to share that vision and that goal.
Hi, my name is Lorna T, and I'm a producer from Malaysia based in Amsterdam. I've produced over 12 feature films, and I have also worked in film financing companies and festivals such as the Berlinale and the Macau Film Festival. I'm the producer of Kodokushi, and Janos Victoria is the director scriptwriter of the film, and she has worked extensively in documentary and in the journalistic arena, and also a number of award-winning shorts. Here's to Janos.
Kodokushi is a Japanese word which means lonely death. It is also a social phenomenon in Japan, which refers to a body undiscovered for weeks and months because nobody remembered them. They were forgotten. But I am making a film of hope. I am telling the story through two cities. Against the backdrop of aging Tokyo and the chilling drug war in Manila, this film will show how loneliness is universal. There is no culture in the world that doesn't fear lonely death. Nobody wants to die alone. Through this film, I hope to show how vital it is for people to feel remembered and not be forgotten. The journey of the film started in Tokyo Talents, where it received the Best Talent Project Award. And last year, it participated in the first film market of the Film Development Council of the Philippines, where it received 5 service grants. I am very happy to share that we will be working with some of the best creative talents. In the Philippines, we have already secured 2 leading actresses. Nadine Lustre is a prolific young actress. Her films have been blockbuster successes. Feisty and bold, she is one of the most outstanding talents of her generation. Pokwang is a famous comic who has transitioned to dramatic roles. She has garnered Best Actress awards for the last 2 years for her dramatic films. She exudes the warmth that every Filipino mother embodies. For the director of photography, we have acclaimed Akiko Ashizawa. Her distinctive cinematography has enhanced the work of her collaborators like Kiyoshi Kurosawa. I love her treatment of light, and I'm very excited to see how she will apply her eye to Tokyo and Manila.
Our fellow producers, Dan Villegas is a Filipino producer and one of the most sought-after director-producer with vast experiences in doing both independent and studio films, doing well both in the local box office and film festival circuit. And Sojo Ichiyama is one of the most prolific names in Japan, having produced films that have premiered in Berlin, Cannes, and Venice, and has worked with filmmakers such as Jachanka, Sabu, and Takashi Kitano. He's also the head of Tokyo Filmex. We will support Janus, and we will surround her with the most experienced team possible to be able to work with her to achieve the vision of the film that she wants to make. The budget for Kodokushi is approximately US $980,000. We've secured around 20% in kind for equipment, post-production, sound, and also the development of this film. We have actively been talking to investors in the Philippines, and now with the name cast attached, very strong name cast, we are planning to go further with the offers that have been given to us. We are casting for a lead actor in Japan, and once that is secured, we will also pursue further the companies that we've been talking to in Japan. We're also going to apply for the co-production funds in Japan and also in the Philippines early next year. We also have interest from companies in China, Hong Kong, and France, and we want to be able to continue the discussions further with them on how to work together. We're open to talk to everyone who feels an affinity with the subject and who wants to come in and participate with us, the team, with Janus, on how to move this project forward. We thank you for listening, and we hope to speak to you soon.
Thank you for listening to our project.
Let's do this! Hi, my name is Laura, and I'm a Canadian Screen Award nominated, Canadian Comedy Award nominated director from Toronto, Canada, and the director of the queer comedy heist movie, Let's Do This.
Hi, I'm Bona Sadu, and I'm the producer. I started off in short docs, and since then worked on over 20 projects in narrative all the way to commercials.
Let's Do This is a film that you have not seen before. There has never been a queer comedy heist movie, and that is what we are going to be making. Let's Do This follows the story of four best friends, Hazel, Sam, Priya, and Cal, as they work their meaningless jobs after spending way too much money on their degrees. So they decide to do the heist of a hurricane money machine from the breakfast television show that one of them works at. Unfortunately, none of them have any idea what they are doing, and hilarity ensues. The target audience for Let's Do This is millennials as well as the queer community, anybody 18 to 35 and 35 plus who cannot and has not paid back their student loans.
Fun fact, did you know that the pink dollar is worth about $3 trillion globally?
Fona, what's the pink dollar?
Great question. So the pink dollar is the buying power of the LGBTQ community. And so what that means for this film is it results in more sales, more views, and more investors in the project.
And what that means is more money.
Exactly. And speaking of money, our budget is $2.5 million Canadian. Currently, we've locked in 25% in producer and private equity. We want to secure an additional 50% through grants and funds. And finally, the last 25% will be locked in with sales and investors.
Let's Do This is 1 part Ocean's 11, 1 part Broad City, both going to a Beyonce concert.
So I'm going to share some of our corollary films. We have Booksmart, which had $6 million in its budget, but made over $20 million in the box office. Now that audience, they're now the TikTokers of the world, where for some reason they have millions of followers and millions of views daily. We have Late Night, which is a $4 million budget that made also over $20 million in box office. And it shows that we could bring big stars onto projects that have smaller budgets, and it's still really successful. Of course, we have Juno. It was 6.5 million Canadian everything, and it made over $200 million in the box office. And then with Wedding Banquet, it was a $1 million budget movie, but it made over $23 million in box office. With that one, there was main characters that were hella queer and with such a tiny budget.
One of the keys to all of the corollary films that we're talking about is that they're small passion projects that just hit an audience. And I think that being queer folks ourselves and knowing what it's like to not see yourself represented in media all the time is something that we really want to change. One of the reasons that we're creating Let's Do This is because it's so important to us to see ourselves reflected in media and not have our sexuality or our gender be our entire story. We are queer people, but we are producers and directors and writers and siblings and people who are just out in the world day to day. In a world where we have people like Donald Trump in power, in a world where there are so many people whose lives are at stake. When 3 trans women get attacked on the streets of LA last week, it is so important to us to normalize our existence and the existence of people like ourselves through a queer comedy heist movie. Come, watch us be regular people, laugh at us, laugh with us. LGBTQ communities have never had more buying power, have never had more eyeballs, and also have never been more vocal. And we want to make a movie that says, we see you, we love you, we hear you. So what we're looking for with this film is potential investors, we're looking for sales agents, and people who want to support queer cinema. We're very open to having conversations with people who are just interested in what we're making and the message that we're trying to portray. Thanks so much.
Hi, I'm Rachel Feldman. I'm the director and co-writer of Lily, a political thriller based on the remarkable life of Lily Ledbetter, the woman about whom President Obama named his first piece of legislation the Lily Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. Lily was an Alabama tire factory worker who endured 20 years of sexual harassments in a toxic environment in order to bring home the best paycheck to her family. All she wanted was to earn the same amount of money as the men for the same job. And when she demanded that, how did the company react? They threatened to kill her. What does a woman need to do in order to get equal pay? If you're Lily Ledbetter, you go all the way to the Supreme Court. That's maybe why her name sounds familiar to you. But this movie is the story you don't know. There are many great examples of Oscar-winning prestige dramas that are about whistleblowers who fight for truth and justice, like Norma Ray or Erin Brockovich or The Insider or Spotlight. But this is not a courtroom drama. What I'm interested in as a filmmaker is the psychological and the personal. What does it feel like to sit at dinner with your family or tuck your kids in at night? What does it feel like to go to church and have your entire congregation turned against you, or have your coworkers not speak up because they're threatened by the company? How do you find the guts inside to fight against these monolithic powers? I'm thrilled to report that Meryl Streep is championing the film. And with CAA's support, we'll soon be signing an A-list actor to this bravura role. I'd like to introduce you to J. Todd Harris, my partner, a veteran producer.
Hi, I'm J. Todd Harris, and I'm so excited to be producing this movie with director Rachel Feldman. When I read this script last year, it made me shake with anger that we're still fighting this fight all these years later. Rachel's a deeply experienced director with an activist spirit and a clear-eyed vision for this important movie. I know we'll get an award-winning actress to play the part of Lily, and we'll shoot this next spring or summer in a southern state with a big tax credit to help defray at least a third of our $15 million budget. I hope you'll join us on this important movie.
I've been a director in Hollywood for 25 years. It hasn't always been easy. I know what it feels like to be sidelined by gender discrimination. Is Lily a movie with themes of social change and justice? You bet it is. But more importantly, it's an edge-of-your-seat roller coaster ride that will leave the audience cheering. I hope you'll join us.
Hello. Did you know that over 40% of homeless teenagers are LGBTQ, even though they only represent 7% of the overall youth population? Or that LGBTQ kids whose parents reject them are 8.4 times more likely to attempt suicide? Yeah, let that sink in. I know it's sad, But it's not all hopeless, because there is a rapidly growing movement of conservative Christian moms who love and accept not just their LGBTQ kids, but the entire community. And they are over 10,000 strong. Spread across the country, but connected by Facebook groups, they call themselves Mama Bears, because while their love might be warm and fuzzy, they fight ferociously for queer rights. I'm Darisha Kai. I'm the Emmy-winning director of Trans in America, Texas Strong, and the co-director of Chavella. Mama Bears is my second feature-length documentary, and it's going to chronicle the lives of these moms through the lenses of 3 specific mothers. And it all started with this one.
Isn't that my t-shirt? I'm going to sleep in it as a dress.
My earliest memories of Kai was this child just acted very different than my other boys.
Hey, Mama, I'm going to buy a garden bow for you.
By 3.5, Kai was saying, "You know I'm a girl, Mommy. You know I'm a girl."
Texas House voted for a so-called bathroom bill.
The bill would require students to use the bathroom that corresponds with the gender on their birth certificate.
I don't know. I don't think sleepovers are a good idea, Kathy.
Why?
Not everybody understands what trans is.
This is the face of a transgender child in Texas. Do we as a state really want to force her into a men's bathroom?
Other girls get to go to the girls' bathroom, and I don't get to. And I'm a girl, so I should go to the girls' bathroom.
What's your favorite book in the Bible?
Esther.
Why?
E-S-T-H-E-R.
Why is Esther your favorite?
Her pretty necklace. She became queen because of her story, because she helped people, and let's see, that's basically it.
Kimberly lost her friends, her church community, and her entire family because she decided to advocate for her daughter. Now that is some badass motherly love, but she couldn't have done it alone. The Mama Bears helped her every step of the way. They loved, guided, supported her, and they stood in the gap. And one of those moms is our second lead, Sarah Cunningham, who founded the Free Mom Hugs movement and who went viral a couple of years ago when she decided to offer to serve as a stand-in mom at same-sex weddings that the biological parents refused to attend. And she's inspired moms and dads all over the nation to do the same. Our third mom is a perfect example of what this process looks like. 2 steps forward, 10 steps back. Her name is Tanita, and she loves her daughter, her lesbian daughter, unconditionally, even though she still thinks homosexuality is a sin. This journey is not for the weak.
Hello, I'm producer Laura Tatham. Not only is Mama Bears in post-production, we already have an incredibly strong rough cut in. We have an estimated completion date of late October. We just need a little bit more funding to help us get there. Thus far, we've been funded by individual donors as well as several prestigious arts foundations. We also have a co-production deal in place with ITVS, which guarantees that a feature-length version of our film will be broadcast on PBS next year. We're fundraising for post-production and distribution, and our total budget is $835,000 with a $155,000 budget gap. In addition, we're fundraising for our ambitious impact campaign, coming in at $280,000. Our campaign is set to launch in mid-2021, and with it, a rainbow army of Mama Bears will travel across the country, going into churches that are struggling with what they call the LGBTQ question. These Mama Bears are born grassroots advocates for the film, and they will promote it wherever they go. During a time in which America is filled with so much divisiveness, let's help us get the Mama Bears mission out into the world so it can be truly a loving and accepting place for all. Thank you so much. If you're interested in seeing a cut, our deck, or our finance materials, please be in touch.
I'm Kimi Howley, the writer-director of Mouth. I'm Isabel Martin, and I'm one of the producers on Mouth.
And I'm Kim Bailey, and I'm very excited to be producing Mouth as well.
So Mouth follows Reina, who's a foreign exchange student from Hong Kong, whose senior year is unexpectedly cut short when she's forced to vacate campus due to the pandemic. and she's desperate to remain in the States to finish her degree, so Raina opts to move into the Malibu mansion of the family she tutors for. But she soon realizes that her new boss, Tom, this divorced, unfathomably wealthy patriarch of the family, may be more of a threat than the pandemic. And as she's confined to Tom's compound, Raina begins to realize that all aspects of her life, her shelter, her sustenance, and social interactions are increasingly controlled by this off-kilter man who surveils every inch of his Malibu mansion. And there's also Maisie, who's this capricious, strung-out au pair who watches after Tom's teenage children. And Raina must decide if Maisie can be trusted or if she's actually Tom's sexual wingman. So alliances are made and betrayed as each woman tries to navigate her place in the home. And after Raina starts suffering from bizarre gaps in her memory, she begins to suspect that Tom is secretly drugging her. And when she discovers this pharmaceutical treasure trove in his closet, she realizes that in order to survive, she has to start fighting dirty. Ultimately, Mouth is this salacious indictment of the nuclear family. And the film will be this suspenseful, wild ride featuring debilitating hypochondria, poisoning as foreplay, and voyeurism taken to a hedonistic extreme, all with this feminist twist. Raina is truly a warrior in isolation, and she has to contend with everything that she's been taught about sexuality, stability, and self-worth. And her story is really an example of an abusive situation that's been exacerbated by COVID. But obviously, since this is ultimately a triumphant story about female survival, Raina will inevitably break free. And her moment of catharsis takes place after she secretly doses Tom with this absurd amount of acid, which forces him to relinquish the control that we'll see he's so obsessively cultivated. And we'll reward our audience with this epic moment of masculine unraveling, which we rarely see in contemporary media. As a former au pair, I've experienced the sexual blurring of boundaries that occurs when you cohabitate with a strange family. And as a filmmaker, I'm most intrigued by the intricacies of the human psyche, especially when you're under duress. So my hope is that Mouth is this thought-provoking, enthralling thriller with a really important political message about the fight for female bodily autonomy. Kim and I founded our production company, Corporate Witchcraft, in order to make movies like Mouth, female-driven stories with a genre twist that push forward the cultural conversation.
The script has won numerous awards, including the Blue Cat Prize, and Kimmy is a rare filmmaker who is able to balance a commercial sensibility and a nuanced visual style. Mouth will be incredibly cinematic thanks to Swimming Pools by Francois Ozon, and some comparable recent films include Thoroughbred, Swallow, and Gone Girl, all of which have received considerable success in the marketplace.
Kimmy is in the perfect position to make her first feature. And Kim and I are experienced in making first features. We've just done it on our film Clementine, which starred Sydney Sweeney from Euphoria, which premiered at Tribeca in 2019 and which we sold to Oscilloscope.
Isabel and I have great relationships across agencies, and our plan is to attach actors in the roles of Tom, Maisie, and Raina before exposing the script wide in the marketplace. Kimmy and her project are well supported by her representatives at UTA and Kaplan-Perrone, and she's currently writing a script with Honey Boy director Alma Harrell. On the TV side, she's worked with both Amazon and Netflix, and her original episodic series, Sugar, is currently in negotiations with some major networks.
We're currently budgeted at below $1 million, and we're looking for our equity partners now. This will be a single location shoot in Los Angeles, and we already have a Malibu compound identified that will allow us to shoot at cost. The shoot will be COVID friendly with limited VFX, limited stunts, and limited cast. We're so excited to meet with potential partners while we're at virtual TIFF, and we can't wait to discuss this project more. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ash Mayfair and I'm a writer-director from Vietnam. I am so honored to be sharing with you my project called Skin of Youth. Skin of Youth will be my second feature film and will also be my second collaboration with my producer, Ngọc Trần. Our first film together, The Third Wife, premiered at Toronto International Film Festival in 2018 and has been to over 70 film festivals worldwide. Skin of Youth is set in Saigon, Vietnam in 1998. This is a love story between a transgender singer Kong San and her boyfriend, a boxer Kong Nam. San works at a nightclub as a singer and dancer, and she also moonlights as an escort for powerful men. Nam is a professional boxer who teaches kids to box at a local gym. San is desperate to have her gender reassignment surgeries, and in order to have his girlfriend, Nam enters an illegal underground cage-fighting ring where men may fight to their death. The stress of all this violence starts to fracture their relationship. So Nam occasionally finds comfort in a young prostitute called Mimi, and eventually he ends up making her pregnant. When San finds out about this betrayal, she's devastated. On top of this, San's quest for the surgery is denied due to her history of depression and suicide attempts. Nevertheless, San finds it in herself to forgive Nam and decides to take Mimi under her care. Unexpectedly, looking after Mimi gives San the strength to endure her disappointment. Just when these three young people thought they could create a family together, tragedy strikes again. On a trip to the seaside, a robber becomes violent towards San and Mimi. Nam accidentally kills him, and as a result, he's arrested. Towards the end of the film, San now has to find a way to free the man that she loves from spending the rest of his life in prison. However, freeing Nam may cost San everything she has, including her new family and even her dream to live in the body of a woman. In 1998, I was 13 years old and I was living in Vietnam. This was 4 years after the US had lifted the trade embargo on Vietnam, and overnight Saigon had turned into a metropolis filled with new culture, film, music, photography. However, under the communist regime, young people like myself were able to see examples of personal liberation everywhere, yet we were not allowed to live it in our own reality. I was shamed for kissing my classmate, a girl, in 8th grade. I want to make Skin of Youth for these young people who still feel like they don't belong, who still feel like society does not give them a space. I want to make Skin of Youth for my 13-year-old self because she did nothing wrong. Visually, this film will be an exciting, fast-paced, raw and dynamic kind of film. All my cast are non-professional actors, with the young girl playing San going through the actual process of her transition on the screen as we film her. Skin of Youth is such a personal project for me, not only because it's so close to my childhood, but also because I have this actress who had put her love and trust so much into us and into our project, and put her life and dream on hold, waiting for us to roll camera.
Yes, so this is our second film together. I am so happy and excited to work with our director Ash Mayfair again after our first film, The Third Wife. Skin of Youth has been in its well-development stage. We were in Southeast Asian Fiction Film Lab, a script lab in Southeast Asia in 2019. And on the same year, we are participated in Asian Project Market Busan Film Festival and won the Surfon Award. Earlier this year, 2020, we were in Berlinale Co-Production Market presenting this project. Our plan is to start filming in 2021. We are secure 30% of the budget, 800,000 euros. And we really want to build this project as international co-production and looking for a co-producer, sales agent, distributor who can come on board and help us to make the film happen. I'm really looking forward to meeting all of you and discuss about our project, and together we can make the film happen. Thank you.